Hello again. This is chapter 7 now of the Odyssey. It's quite a short one, I think. Exhausted, they slumped across their oars. Odysseus raised a sail, and a favourable breeze carried them into the great round O of the central ocean and away from its dangerous magical margins. The rising moon wounded the sea with a spear of silver, and the old familiar constellations showed themselves one by one like signposts marking the way home. Not far now, men. If this wind holds, we shall see home within the week. Over yonder, where the sun went down, is the island of the sun, but we shan't be putting ashore there. And foolishly, that was all he said. Just then, the wind rattled the sail angrily against the mast, and the sea shivered into 1,000 cat's paws. Big warm raindrops hit their weary shoulders as though the gods were spitting on them with contempt. Eurylochus set the boat rocking as he heaved himself to his feet. Well, I say we do pull into the island of the sun, and I say we light ourselves a fire and find ourselves some shelter, and most of all, I say we get some sleep. I don't know about you, comrades, but my arms have been half out of their sockets, and my heart has been half out of my chest with terror. And frankly, I don't give a spit for the wishes of a captain who fed 6 of my friends to the Scylla and never even warned them of the death they had in store. Odysseus drew his silver-studded sword and took 3 paces down the ship towards Eurylochus. But the hands of his other men clasped him round the knees. "He's right, Captain. We're tired. Zeus knows how tired we are. Why shouldn't we put in at the island of the sun? Give us a reason at least." "Death and destruction, are they reasons enough for you?" "What? Monsters, cannibals, lotus-eaters, wolves or bears or Trojans?" "Cows," snapped Odysseus peevishly, and suddenly the whole ship burst out laughing. "Cows?" "Cows, moo-hoo-hoo, ferocious cows." Odysseus gave a hiss of exasperation and turned his back on them and went to the prow. The steersman swung the tiller, and the red-prowed ship heeled round towards the island of the sun. They put ashore by the light of lightning, lashed the sail like a tarpaulin across the open boat, and sheltered from the torrential rain. The island itself had no shelter, no farmhouse or ruin, no fisherman's shack or cave or magical villa. It was a miry acre of couch grass and thorn bushes. The cattle of the sun munched incessantly on the coarse grasses, and their long horns clattered together with a hollow, tuneless music. Their red hides streamed with rain, and their velvety nostrils blew bubbles in the pools of rainwater. Odysseus explained then that Tiresias had forbidden the killing of the cattle, and the men nodded impatiently. Where was the need to kill the sleek, wet cows? Circe had given them bread, raisins, cheese, and pomegranates enough for the voyage. They chewed and baled and baled and chewed, and still the rain soaked them through, and the wind chilled them. It was a new wind, too. It was Poseidon's wind. It blew across the island of the sun like a razor across a stubbly chin, not towards Ithaca and home, but towards Charybdis and Scylla and the clashing rocks. The men grew more and more surly. "You wanted us to keep sailing. We'd be fish food by now if we'd listened to you." Odysseus said nothing, but wrung the rainwater out of his beard and stared out to sea. A week passed. Their food was almost gone. The rain still rained and the wind still blew. Another week passed, and Odysseus wrung the neck of his lucky mascot, and they shared one meal of stew. The rain still rained and the wind still blew. Another week passed, and the men's ribs showed through their skin like the frames of sagging tents. The rain still rained and the wind still blew harder still. Their hearts faltered and their courage shook, and Odysseus knew that disaster was close at hand. "What does it matter if we kill the cursed cows for meat?" said Eurylochus finally. "We're dead if we don't." "Don't say that, don't think it," shouted Odysseus. "I'll pray to Pallas Athene. I'll pray to the goddess of war who kept us safe through 10 years of battles and hardships around the walls of Troy. Did she give us victory just to let us starve to death now? No, I'll pray to Athene. Just be patient one more day. Look, the rain's stopping even now." And he left them and leaned into the wind and walked to the other side of the island to pray. Ever since the killing of the cockerel, he had kept awake, afraid that his men might disobey his orders while he slept. The episode of the bag of winds had taught him not to doze off, but he found it difficult to pray, for every time he closed his eyes, the darkness welcomed him like a soft pillow. As soon as he woke, he could smell the delicious smoke from roasting beef. He ran headlong, fighting his way through the wind as though it was a heavy curtain hung in his path. Too late. A half-eaten carcass rolled slowly on a spit over a sputtering fire. Not a single crew member had hesitated to cram his mouth with chunks of charred, delicious beef. He wrenched meat out of their hands and flung it into the surf, but they only glowered at him and cut themselves some more. Roaring and tearing at his hair, he fell on his knees and beat his forehead against the red prow. His friend Polites brought him a rib of beef and knelt down beside him. "Surely it's better to face death with a full stomach, my lord. Think kindly of us." "I love you all dearly," said Odysseus, pushing the rib of beef away. "That's why I wanted you all to live and see Ithaca again, and your wives and children, and now even the cows are mourning our fate." A loud lowing, deep and doleful, spiralled past them on the wind. It seemed to come out of the cloud of smoke which hid the spitted roasting beef. The men one by one dropped the meat out of their hands, for the mournful mooing came not from any of the live cows which stood in a silent circle around them, but from the carcass spitted over the fire. They could not get to the boat quick enough. They ran it into the water, leaving behind the burning fire, the delicious-smelling meat, some swords and sandals and shirts and lengths of rope. They bent to their oars like men pursued by monsters, and they grunted and ground their teeth with the exertion of rowing. The blades pecked a broken line of white from across the sea. But the trail they left on the greatness of the ocean was no more than the trail of a snail across the roof of a great city, and beneath them, in the cellars of that city, the god Poseidon watched their puny progress and smiled. "I have you now, Odysseus. You blinded my son the Cyclops, and now I shall plunge your red-prowed ship like a little fiery stick into the eye of Charybdis." Poseidon lifted his head above the waves. He pouched the winds in his cheeks and crumpled the sea's surface between his two hands. He loosed his white-maned horses from the icy north, and he caged the rowers round with waterspouts so tall they seemed to touch heaven. He planted his feet on the mountain peaks that rise from the sea floor, and he stood, head and chest out of the sea, to shake out his green hair. In the darkness they might have escaped, but when sunset came, and the sun god, passing over his red island in the west, looked down and saw the roasted cow, he too swore to be avenged. "You have slaughtered one of my beasts, my red-backed beasts, my heart's delight. I shall spit you and roast you till you bellow." And he laid the fiery beams of sunset across the sea and fixed the position of the little ship in the red light, neither sinking nor setting, so that there was no chance of escape under cover of darkness. Hemmed in by monstrous waves, the little ship was nothing but a straw blowing across the water. 12 times it stood on its stern and seemed about to plunge arrow straight to the seabed. Men were shaken from their benches like olives shaken out of a tree. They plunged into the sea and never resurfaced. The mast fell and carried with it all the ropes, stays, sailcloth, and men that clung to it. A wave beat out the baseboards of the boat and lifted Eurylochus bodily over the side. He cursed Odysseus as he went under. And Polites was sucked out through the gaping hole, his hands too wet for Odysseus to keep hold of them. Soon a noise louder than the howling of the wind and the laughter of Poseidon rose above the chaos, the clashing of the rocks and the roar of Charybdis. In the shadow of the cliff which overhung it, the great wheel of whirling water was just starting its downward spiral. The hole at its heart grew deeper by the minute, sucking into it all the floating litter of the slipping sea. Down went casks and kegs, down went masts and ropes. Over the glassy rim went swimmers, oars and spars. Out over the gaping trough, sheer speed hurled the broken ship. It seemed to pause in mid-air. A single figure could be seen astride its red prow. Then the stern dropped, and it plunged downwards. The figure on the prow leapt into the plume of spray which hangs continuously over the monstrous Charybdis. He leapt, arms up, into the spray, and he grasped the little thorn tree that grew out of the cliff face. The tree sagged. Its withered roots writhed in the scanty soil that held them. The man's weight seemed certain to wrench it out of the cliff and drop it with it into Charybdis. But Odysseus had not eaten for 8 days, not so much as a mouthful of beef. He had never been tall, and his stocky frame was shrunk now to skin and bone and trembling muscle. He knotted his thin legs round the tree and hooked his thin arms over it, and he held as still as the mantis insect that hangs on a blade of grass and waits and prays and waits and prays. There, under the cover of the spindrift spray, while Poseidon rolled on his back in the ocean trench and laughed, the goddess Athene answered Odysseus' faithful prayers. She reached out an invisible hand and pressed the earth firm around the tree's roots. She cloaked Odysseus from view in a welter of spray, and as the tide turned and Charybdis' spiral began to unwind, she plucked the red keel of his fast black ship out of the spinning water. The whirling water slowed. The whirlpool grew shallow. Odysseus looked down and saw the keel float free of the current. He offered up thanks to the goddess Athene. He unknotted his aching legs and arms and let himself drop astride the red-painted keel. By paddling frantically through the lava-warmed water, he got out of the evil channel, out from between the two dreadful cliffs, and floated back towards the island of the sun. But surely no amount of paddling, no kicking at the water with weary feet, could have saved him from the toils of Charybdis as it began to recoil, not unless some unseen hand had sped him through the water. Gosh, that was an exciting one. Okay, I'll see you soon for chapter 8.